Hello, ladies and gents. This is Jayme Blasiman, the host of the Femcanic Garage podcast. Welcome to the 5-part series of the dirty little secrets in the automotive and skilled trades industries. This blog series is brought to you by Chasidy Rae Sisk Writing and Communication and Femcanic Garage. We have interviewed industry experts on topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're excited to share their knowledge and experience with all of you. Now let's get started. This week, we will be tackling the subject of sexism with Cheryl Thompson. Cheryl is the CEO of the Center for Automotive Diversity, Inclusion, and Advancement. She is a veteran in the automotive industry with over 30 years' experience at Ford Motor Company and American Axle and Manufacturing. Cheryl has held many positions ranging from skilled trades, operations, engineering, and global leadership. After retiring, she founded the Center for Automotive Diversity, Inclusion, and Advancement, also known as CADIA, which positions her uniquely and qualifies Cheryl to provide insights on the topic of sexism. Let's jump in. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing awesome today. And in the hot seat today is Cheryl Thompson. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing this morning?
I am doing wonderful. I had an opportunity to get to know you a little bit by attending some CADIA meetings. I was invited to those meetings from Tammy Tacklenberg, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is right up my alley. My previous employer, Safe Light Auto Glass, was one of the inaugural members on their DE&I council with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, it's a huge passion of mine, and you are tackling the big audacious goal of really turning a ship around, the Titanic around in our industry. And Chaz and I had talked about it, like we were so excited that you said yes. And we're
Oh,
super
yes.
excited to talk about today's topic, which is sexism. And what I admire about you, Cheryl, is that you're tackling a topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about, and it's almost kind of taboo in our industry. Um, but the only way to move forward is through it. We have to have the difficult conversations, the uncomfortable conversations, and it doesn't mean conflict, right? It
Absolutely.
doesn't have to mean that. But one of my burning questions for you, and I know that you've had other interviews specifically on this topic. You've partnered with other publications to talk about this, and you have been talking about it for years. But what is sexism?
Sexism is present when we have preconceived notions, when we make assumptions, when we have unconscious or conscious bias about the role that women are supposed to play in society and in the workplace. That would be my definition. It's not a university definition, but it would be my definition of what sexism is. And I think it happens in ways that are visible and invisible, and it can happen between women, right? It just doesn't have to be a male female situation.
That's a great call out. And I think sometimes people make the assumption that it's men. Oh,
Hmm.
misogyny, or there's all these like preconceived things around, or mansplaining, and all these different types of things that kind of tie back to it. But it happens a lot with between women as well. And I think
And we do it to
we
ourselves too.
do, don't we? Like,
We
we
do.
put ourselves in certain boxes, and I
We do.
I'm
Hmm.
43 years old, and I realized that I had been putting myself in a particular box, right? It's like these things, that these unconscious, right? Exactly what you said, where we're kind of a product of our environment in some
Oh,
sense, in
so
our
true.
families. And I love that you bring that up, because this isn't an industry thing, right? This is a cultural thing, and it is bigger than the automotive industry. And I like reminding
Absolutely.
women of that, and men of that, that this isn't an automotive problem, and I'll call it a problem. It's a worldwide problem, right?
Right,
And
right.
and this isn't a US thing. This isn't right. It is everywhere. I've interviewed women in Australia, England. Um, I have one in the hopper for India, so I'm real excited for that one. But the
Oh, that should be amazing. I can't wait to hear that one.
right, right. Um, it is a worldwide thing. So I like level setting with people to remind them that this isn't an automotive thing. We're not throwing the industry under the bus. We're just wanting to have a conversation and carve out this niche for ourselves where we feel that we can make a difference, right?
Absolutely.
And that is exactly what you're doing. I love your definition of it, but what got you interested in this, Cheryl? I mean, did you stumble upon this is a pretty big topic and it's not the topic that a lot of people want to talk about.
Well, I have spent over 30 years in the automotive industry. um, Landed there by accident. I had really no plans to go into automotive. My dad was in the automotive industry, and I had plans to do something in IT. But in high school, I found myself pregnant with my son. So I was pregnant at 17, was waitressing at the time. And my dad, who was an engineer at Ford, said, "You know, Ford has a food service department. Why don't you go see if you can apply there? You'll get benefits, they'll pay for your school and all that good stuff." And long story short, I got in through the food service department and I did a tool and die apprenticeship. So I went through the 4 year program, was a journey person for a couple of years, and then I got into engineering. So I just have been the only woman in a room many, many times, the only woman in a factory many, many times, and just saw, to your point, I think you said you were 44 and you're just kind of getting out of that box that you lived in. I'm 55, and I think over the last 3, 4 years, I've also been able to step out of that box. I saw how I was holding my own self back, and I see it even so much more now than when I was in that box. But even when I was there, I saw I had so much more to offer. I saw that so many other women and underrepresented talent had so much more to offer. And it was almost like this invisible force pulling me outside of the company that I worked for. I worked for one of the big three OEMs to do this work, to really shine a spotlight on it and to build community around it. And it's evolved a little bit. It started with just women, and it started with women and what role do we have to play? What's our personal responsibility in this? But I've come to realize that we need to include all people who are underrepresented, and we need to work with leaders, and we need to work on the systemic change. So it's grown and evolved, but that passion's just always been there just because of my own personal experience.
Now, given the topic today, when we're talking about sexism, I think one of the key things here, and I'm glad you were kind of bring the listeners, hey, I'm not a suit, right? I'm not a suit that has been sitting in an office. You've been through various stages of this industry. When have you personally experienced any sexism?
I'm laughing because, oh my goodness, yes, yes, yes. And in subtle ways and not so subtle ways, and ways I didn't even realize were happening to me when they were happening, when they were happening in the moment. So absolutely, yes, absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about what you just said, ways that you didn't even know it was happening. And
Hmm.
I think some of the blatantly obvious things, what do we consider blatantly obvious? Help me out here, Chaz. I'm trying to think of
Oh
some
yeah.
like those ones for
I can give you an
women
example.
are go ahead, sir.
Blatantly obvious would be like some of the stories we've heard where it's this isn't a woman's place. Like, why aren't you at home cooking, cleaning, and changing my babies barefoot and pregnant?
Yeah, that
But
there's a
I
very blatant obvious one right there, right?
right, and I actually think that that blatant sexism is a lot less common because these days because it's we know it's wrong. So I'm glad that you brought up the subtle sexism because I think subtle sexism and also covert sexism are
Yes.
way more common these days. So I would
And
love to hear
I
more
think that
about that.
I think that word covert, right? and it goes to what you were saying, Cheryl, where it's like ways that I didn't even know, right? I've
Mhm.
I've interviewed over 100 women now, and there's been multiple times where women share with me in their interview, they're in their 30s now, and they're like, "Man, I I wish I knew now, or I was as confident then as I am now, or understood things like I do now then. I would have handled it this way," right? And there's
Mm.
a learning
Yes.
around that, and part of what I pick up from them is they didn't even realize it till maybe hours after it happened, sometimes weeks, months, maybe even years after it happened, where it's like, and that's happened to me too, where, you know, I ran into a situation with one of my employers where I didn't reach out to HR till 8 or 9 months later because there was this internal battle with me because I'm not that one. I don't wanna go to HR
Yes,
and make a
right.
big deal, or what if I'm blackballed, or and it was so obvious where people got off the call and called me afterwards and asked me if I was okay and told me that I handled that in way better than they ever would've. And, like, I
Mm.
started getting these, like, this doesn't feel good, but it's like, I can handle it, I'm a big girl, put my big girl panties
That's
on
right.
and
We're
take it,
resilient. That's right.
yeah, I'm gonna take it, and that's where the covert piece comes in, right? And can you talk a little bit about what we understand what the word means, but what does it mean in our industry, and maybe some examples that could help men and women? Because I think some men don't mean to do it. Some of it is a cultural thing where they're just used to doing it that way or saying things that way, right? Especially in our industry.
Yes. Right, right. Well, I'll just give you an example of the overt sexism. And just an early example in my career. This was back in the late 80s, my first day on the job for being an apprentice. So I walk into the shop and I have no idea what I'm walking into. I'm in this factory. I am one of very, very few women, thousands of men in this factory, and I'm going to be doing tool and die. I barely knew what tool and die was. I thought I was going to make tools and die them. I had no clue what I was doing. And I had this supervisor. They were called foremen back in those days. And he was just one of these old school guys, had his cup and his chew. So he was like spitting his tobacco into his cup, right? And he was just so intimidating. And he said to me, have you ever worked in a factory before? And I said, no. And he said, there's a few things you got to learn. And so he was kind of reading me the riot act. And one thing that he said was, and I really don't want you here because you're going to be a distraction to my men. And if men come over and they start talking to you, I'm going to time you. And if they're there longer than 1 minute, I'm going to come in and shoo them away. So that would be, I would say, more overt. I also had a man come up to me and was angry because he said I was taking away his paycheck. So that would be definitely overt. It's obvious. It is really discriminatory. It could be also considered harassment, right? The covert kind, in my mind, is when things are going on behind the scenes to undermine your performance or your credibility or capability. And, I saw this in my career when there was maybe some resentment that a woman got a job that a man felt that he should have had. And so there were sometimes things going on behind the scenes, not really to sabotage her, but maybe not to help her, right? So there was this subtle way of where a man would have helped a male peer, he's not stepping forward to help her. And so she's not getting that support. And because women don't have the networks that men have, there's just that lack of natural support that would happen with a man in his network, right? And there's so much to be said for networks and community and how much that can support you in your career.
Talk a little bit about network. When you say, are you saying network and community are one and the same, or sometimes different?
I think they sometimes can be different. So just think about the people that you're comfortable asking for help in a workplace. versus the people you don't feel comfortable asking for help. So normally, if I don't, let's say I don't know how to read a balance sheet, I'm going to be more comfortable going to another woman who's in my network to ask me, can you help me read this balance sheet? Versus a man, maybe that I don't know, he's not in my network, right? So that would be an example. And then an example of community would be something like women in automotive or women in manufacturing, or I don't know if there's anything for women who work in a shop environment or skilled trade environment. I sure wish there was back in my day, but that would be more like community. And I think community is so important because if you're one of the few women wherever you're at, I think there's this tendency to isolate. And you isolate and these doubts and these fears and then these situations come up. You sometimes think it's you, like there's something wrong with you or it's your fault or you did something. But when there is community available, you find out that it's not just you. There's nothing wrong with you. And there's a sense of support. There's this feeling of course you can, rather than people sitting back, folding their arms and looking at you like, can she really do it?
Wow, I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm nodding my head and I'm like, that's exactly, excuse me, that's exactly why I created Femcanic Garage, is
Mm,
because of that isolation. And there's something in me polling saying that there's no way that I'm the only one. Is there
that's right.
something wrong with me? Why is this happening, right? And I yeah, I get it. And I want to talk a little bit more about community and network because and we'll get there in just a moment, but I want to tie the two together to help people connect the dots. Even though it may seem obvious, I like talking about situations, and when we talk about sexism, I feel like, and this is my opinion, that it's almost similar to white privilege. It's it's kind of
Mm,
like male privilege,
it's triggering.
right? And
Mm,
I'm gonna give this simple example, right? I am finishing my podcast room here, and I needed some carpet glue because I wanted to put down some carpet in here. I reached out to someone on Facebook Marketplace. Uh, they had some. They communicated with me, and anyone who sees Facebook Marketplace or has used it, you can actually see the profile picture of the person. So even though I have a unisex name, the picture shows I'm a female, right?
mhm,
I asked my dad to go with me because I was picking it up at a warehouse. And as a woman, I don't want to go to a warehouse by myself to pick something up. So my dad goes with me, and I'm talking to the gentleman, asking him questions, but he's looking at my dad to answer.
mm.
And I'm the one literally with the money out in my hand, and he's still talking to my dad. And I don't think this gentleman's a bad guy. I don't think that
Right,
as a woman, right? But that's a form of sexism, right?
right, right.
And I have had experiences in conversations with some men where they get defensive when using a word like sexism, mansplaining, uh, I don't know, is there any other ones, Chaz, you wanna throw in here? Those types of things, right, where there's some defensiveness, and I feel that, and I'm white, a lot of white people fall into the defensiveness around, um, white privilege,
Mhm.
and I feel like it for me personally, I've observed similar thing, like similar defensiveness between the two, like with the two.
Right, right. It is one of those words that is triggering. Privilege is triggering, so is sexism because people think you're calling them a bad person. And I do feel bad for white males in particular, because they have been, I think a lot of them have been feeling attacked. And I think there is good intention. I think it's just a lack of awareness sometimes. And that situation that you were describing, it sounds like a microaggression or a micro inequity to me. That's the terms I would use. It's something subtle. It's was nothing intentional, but it made you feel like, well, what am I, chopped liver?
Yeah, like, what?
I've got the money
Hello?
right here.
I'm the one with the money.
Right, right. And so when we think of, the difference, the privilege, let's just talk about the privilege that your dad had because he was a man. Like no one questioned his credibility.
Mm,
Um, there was just an assumption that he was the person in charge. So his gender didn't get in the way. Your gender got in the way in that situation. So, in that case, your dad had the privilege over you.
right.
And it's just an advantage, right? It's not anything bad. It's just an advantage because we're used to seeing men as more credible because for thousands and thousands of years they have been the ones in the positions of power and influence and doing these tasks, these jobs, being in these situations that are typically historically more male dominated.
And white, male dominated,
Yes,
right? Very
yes, yes.
white. And it's not that
Hmm.
people of color or women are not capable of doing the same thing and maybe even better,
Oh,
right?
absolutely,
And that's
absolutely.
all it's about. It's not I think that's the biggest thing with our blog series is we are using those strong terms, right? It's to get people's attention because
Mhm.
it kind of goes back to the thing, why are women so angry? Why are people of color so angry? Well, we've tried asking nicely for a long time. A long time.
Yeah,
And when
it
something
does open
doesn't
up the
work,
conversation.
at some point, you get frustrated. You know,
Mhm.
throw all that out the window. Maybe you're a sports fan. I'm a Cleveland fan all around. Cleveland, Ohio. Yes, you can feel
Oh, I'm from Cleveland too.
ooh, yay! You can feel sorry for me. Fine. Right? I get it. At some point we get frustrated as the fans and we yell at the TV, right? We yell at it, right? Cuz we're frustrated. You work on a
Right.
project, you try figuring it out. You try calmly figuring it out for a long time. Eventually you get frustrated and start yelling and probably cussing and maybe even throwing tools across the garage, right?
Mhm.
It's
Right,
it's the
right.
same principle. It's the same principle.
Yes.
That's all.
Yes.
And that doesn't
Yep.
make anyone right or wrong. It's just we want to be heard
Mhm.
and not
Yeah.
favored. Not favored.
Right. Yeah.
We don't
We wanna be heard and we wanna have opportunity,
That's
and
it.
we want access to that opportunity.
That's it.
Yes.
That's it.
Mhm.
It truly is that simple. And sexism is a powerful, I'd say, triggering word. I think you hit the nail on the head. A triggering word.
Mhm.
What do you recommend if you could talk to men directly? What if you had a group of men sitting down and the topic was sexism and how we address it, move through it, and make change? What would you tell them?
Well, I'm not sure I would tell them. I would invite conversation with them. I have found I've been doing DEI training for the last 2 or 3 years. And I have found when you set yourself up to tell or to lecture or to teach, you can only get so far. You're only talking to the mind. But when you can talk to the heart through emotion, and that comes with conversation, it comes with storytelling, it comes with, helping them reflect a little bit about the women in their life. Even when I was a dye maker, all the way back in the late 80s, one of the best pieces of advice I got was if someone, said a joke that was off color or sexist or off color, just ask them, how do you think your daughter would feel if you just said that to her, right? So you just have to get them to think about the women in their life and start with a little bit of storytelling. I think that resonates a lot. So using examples and inviting them to share stories, experiences, and to facilitate conversation. That's what I would want to do.
I think that's spoken like a true expert right there. Lead with your heart, not your head.
Mm,
And
hmm.
as I sit here and I listen to you say that, Cheryl, I'm like, God, that makes perfect sense. But then there's part of me that steps back and is like, wow, there's a real vulnerability to that, and that's scary.
Yes,
Like
it is. It is.
talking to the women out there, right? So you have that conversation with the men, and what I'm hearing, and it makes perfect sense, honestly, because I think that's what drives change is when we can share stories about how we're more alike than different. It becomes more
Hmm.
relatable, right? Rather than
Right.
focusing on the differences or the what ifs. Well, what if this happened? What if
Yes.
this happened? Well, technically, you could walk out the door, a wheel could fall off of an airplane and kill you. You're still going to walk
Right.
out
With
the door
those,
to get in your car, though, right? There's a lot of what ifs, right?
yes.
Um,
And sometimes we tend to go to the extremes with those what ifs, and that's what
Catastrophizing.
divides us. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And what I see a lot in this industry is it's kind of like the covert example that you're saying, where I see a lot of women getting stuck in their career, right?
Mm. Hmm.
And not progressing in the automotive industry at the rate that maybe male counterparts. And that kind of lends itself to it. What would you tell the women who want to be part of this movement and change, but there's that fear around the vulnerability and maybe being rejected? Maybe who knows at this point, right? It just depends on her story.
Well, again, I would go back to the community. We're so much stronger together. So surround yourself with like minded women, like minded people in general that want change, and don't try to go it alone. So that would be the first piece of advice. We were talking about community earlier, and I was thinking back to the first experience I had with a lean in circle. And I know this is, on the Sheryl Sandberg, and there's a lot of backlash on that book, Lean In. But I will tell you, having been a part of a very big company and being part of women's groups, I there was a time where I isolated, and when I sat down in this smaller circle of women, and one of the exercises that they have you open up with is talk about a time you chose to lean in or lean out and how that made you feel. And sitting around the table with women I had worked with for years and hearing their stories about how capable and how much experience they had, um, experience I didn't even know that they had, and hearing about the self doubt that they felt, the imposter syndrome that they felt. Everybody was in tears, right? We just don't know. So that just made us so much stronger and able to support each other because you find out it's not just you. You find out that everyone struggles with confidence. Even men struggle with confidence. I'll tell you what, there was like a 12-year period where I was working for a gentleman, and I would kind of share that I was having a challenge with my confidence. And he would tell me, don't talk about that in public. I put it on a development plan one time and he told me to take it off. And I said, well, don't you ever struggle with confidence? And he said, absolutely not. Well, a few years later, I heard him talk about this confidence issue that he had struggled with. And I went and talked to him later and I said, you, for all these years, you had me thinking that there was something wrong with me. So I just think it's, being able to have these people who support you, that is absolutely the number one thing that I think can pull us all ahead. Because then we encourage each other to go for that position, that next move, that next position. What's going to get us to that next level? because we do tend to hold ourselves back. But when you have somebody next to you saying, of course you can and you should, and pushing you a little bit, that makes all the difference.
Oh, I want to pause here. Chaz, am I missing any key questions for Cheryl? Because I'm sitting here reflecting on what we've talked about. We've talked about overt, covert, right? Sexism, the difference. We've talked about, what are different examples of both. We've also talked about, um, you know, how do we open up these conversations with men around this triggering topic, right? And there it can lead to defensiveness. But once we're in a space of defensiveness, communication really starts shutting down and nothing comes in, right? And the key is, how do we have these conversations that don't lead to defensiveness, that allow us to start moving the needle, right? You've talked about going into your heart and having those conversations, becoming a storyteller. And I think that is invaluable, Cheryl. We interviewed one of the other experts, Angelina. God, my weeks are getting mixed up. Chaz, which week is Angelina for? I forget.
Week 3, so last
I think,
week.
okay, got it. Week 3. And she's an instructor, um a for skilled trades, and you can listen to all the details for that one from last week. But she shared about how her students listen, because I had interviewed her for Femcanic Garage, and her students listened. Some of her students, majority men, listened to her episode and approached her after they listened to it and said, "I had no idea you went through that, and I'm sorry."
Mm. Exactly, exactly. People don't know. It's not bad intentions. It's just a lack of awareness. One more sexism topic that I would love to touch on is benevolent sexism,
Ooh.
because this happens, I think, in all areas, because the man is just trying to just be helpful. Because so let's just go back to welding or the skilled trades. I can remember during my skilled trades days being put on jobs that were easier, and I was like really trying to get all the experience I could and be the best I could, so I was asking for the more challenging assignments, and I just felt like because I was a woman I got the easier assignments. There was a woman I was talking to not too long ago that was going through a welding program at a major university, and there was a task that she had to do, having to do with welding, and the instructor said, "Oh, but it's okay, you don't have to do it because you're a girl," right? And he was being nice, he thought he was doing her a favor, but she's like, well, wait a minute, don't treat me any different. I want to do the challenging welding task just like anyone else. I want to pull my own weight. And then I also saw it when I got into engineering, where sometimes I wasn't asked if I wanted to take on an assignment that would require me to relocate or require me to take on additional responsibilities, because they thought, oh, she's a single mom, she's got a son at home, she's not going to want to move or have to work more hours. So often people are doing it thinking they're doing us a favor, but they're really not.
They're taking the decision away from you.
Hmm.
I,
And
Right.
go ahead, Chaz.
no, I think that's a great point because you mentioned it earlier that as women, we're not saying, hey, treat us special. And that's something that has resonated in, I'm pretty sure, every interview I've ever done with a woman about being in this industry, where they will say, yes, we need mentorship programs, but not just for women, for everyone. Women, they don't want to be singled out.
Right.
Especially in this industry, we're already singled out by virtue of the fact that we are women. We just want the same opportunities, the same support, and that benevolent sexism. I mean, thank you, but no thank you, because that's just pointing out the
Hmm.
differences, and we're different, but we're not that different. Like we can do it all too.
Right.
You even
Right.
see that in families, Cheryl. Like, I'm sitting here thinking about growing up, and I still experience that with my dad, and I have to check my dad. I'm like, "Dad, I got this." You
Yes.
know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like, Hey,
And it requires an awareness on your part too. I mean, that's what I was talking about earlier. Sometimes I wasn't even aware I was putting myself and keeping myself in that box.
right. That is a great call, and that's where I'm seeing a theme in a lot of these interviews is, you know, and Chaz and I have said it, this isn't about male bashing and burning our bras, and this is not
Right.
that, right? This is about having open conversations for all of us to figure this out because women play just as big of a part as men. They're different parts, but we have to understand these things. Like, when we talk about sexual harassment, we're talking to Petra, and Petra's like, she brought up a great point. Like, our part in this is to teach people how we want to be treated. That's our
Hmm.
part as women.
That's
Our
right.
second part of that is when we are teaching those boundaries, we have to be clear in our communication with our tone, our voice inflection, and our body language, right? That's our part in it. And
That's right.
and if we don't own both of those parts, that's on us, that part of it, right? The male's part of it is to respect it.
Hmm. Right.
2
I
parts.
love that. I love that. It's one thing to draw the boundary, but to maintain that boundary, that's a whole another challenge, and that does take work and strength on the female's part. And again, I go back to the community of why that can be so helpful in helping you maintain those boundaries. To have someone to say, "Hey, this just happened to me. Let me run this by you. What do you think?"
Yeah. It's
Right.
invaluable. It's like
Hmm.
having your best friend to vent to about your kids driving you nuts or your spouse driving you nuts. It's kinda that level set to say, "Ah, okay." No different than joining a
Hmm.
parenting community, right? As a
Right. Right.
parent, you have thoughts that go through your head like, "Oh my god, I'm a terrible parent. I'm bad, I'm a bad person," and then you go on some of these groups, right? Community, and you're like, "Oh, phew, okay, I'm not
That's
the
right.
only one. I got this. I can do
Right.
this. Let's
Yes.
tackle
Yes.
another day," right? And
Hmm.
sometimes that's all we have and what we need. Yeah,
Right.
that is such a great call out, and I quite honestly, I forgot all about that, and it may be one of the most important ones. When you think about
Hmm.
the
It
blatantly
is.
obvious and over, it's like, "Okay, that's really obvious," right?
Right. And I was reading your interview series, the part 4, where there were a number of quotes from women who are mechanics and more hands-on, more mechanical. And I think that because there's so few women, I mean the numbers are so low. When you look at automotive in general, it's, I don't know, 23-24% of women in automotive overall. But when you get into the mechanic, it's what, 1 to 2%.
Yeah.
And so because there are so few women, there's less opportunity for community. And that can leave women feeling isolated and not able to advocate for themselves as much as they would if there were other women around. So I don't know, just a theory of maybe why that still is happening in that part of the automotive industry.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Now, can you talk just a little bit about CADIA? Because I think when we talk about resources, um, and community, and CADIA isn't just about women. It is diversity all holistically. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah. So we're an organization that is working with individuals, leaders, and we're really looking to drive systemic change in all of automotive. So we're working with the retail side in terms of dealer groups and dealers, the auto care or aftermarket side, and then the OEs and the tier ones. And we do education through workshops. We have a roundtable that meets monthly. So anyone who is leading DEI in their company, we come together once a month, and I'll do a little teaching. And then we have a member company share how they're applying it, a lesson learned, something that they want to communicate based on whatever the topic is. And then we have a 13-week accelerator program if somebody really wants to take a deep dive on DE&I. And then once a month on Tuesdays, I think it's the second Tuesday of the month, we do something called CADIA Connects, and that's free to anyone. It's just building that community. And on the 8th of March, we're going to be doing a talk on bias for International Women's Day, since the theme is breaking the bias.
Oh, yeah, we went yes. I love it.
Yes.
And what I love about the CADIA group is it's looking at the holistic, not just
Hmm.
women, people of color, I mean, you name it, you guys cover everything, and you cover all aspects of automotive as well. It's not just
Right.
dealers, it's not just OEMs, you cover all aspects, and I think that's so important because people can cross over, right?
Yes.
And I think start to create a consistent experience across the industry, we have to look at the different pockets in the industry.
Right. And we need to approach it from a number of different angles. So, absolutely want to see more women get into the industry and progress so that we see more women in the C suite. But I also want to help the industry overall with diversity, because I think the more diversity in leadership we see, the more it's going to help women. The more women we see in leadership, the more it's going to help everyone, right? If we solve for those people that have historically been on the margins, it's going to help everyone. And then we've got to go back in and fix the systems, the processes, the policies, thinking about flexibility, thinking about leave, thinking about benefits. Our systems were invented in the 1950s by men for men, where there were single working, single member working families, where there was typically a spouse who stayed at home and took care of the kids and all of the workings of the house. And now that's changed, and the workplace doesn't work for everyone. We've also, our demographics are shifting. And so we need to include more people. We can't, we've got to expand our talent pools and start fishing from different ponds. And that one pond we've been fishing from is overfished.
Yeah. Yeah. That is well put. Chaz, have I missed anything, or is there anything that we wanted to make sure we covered that I may have overlooked?
Um, I don't know that it's something that you overlook so much as something that I just feel like we would be remiss to not mention the fact that we are approaching the topic of sexism from a woman's perspective because we're women, but we've had conversations, Jayme, and we've realized, and would really like if everybody else realized as well, that sexism hurts men too in different ways. That belief that a woman belongs here comes with the belief that a man doesn't get to do those things. There's the idea that men aren't allowed to have real emotions. They're not allowed to be sad. They're not allowed to be. I mean, to Cheryl's story about her male colleague and not being willing to admit that he had some insecurities, men can't do that. There is a stigma against that, and that's unfair to them. That limits who they become. And one pet peeve is the whole like boys will be boys concept, because
Mm.
it, I feel like that's just very demeaning. Um, like you have no control over yourself. Um, so, I mean, with that, sexism needs to be addressed from a cultural perspective. We've talked about that. Um, and we all need to come together and work towards something being, improved for all of us. It does impact all of us.
That's such a good point, Chaz. I think that men were raised and conditioned, through society to not be vulnerable. I can't tell you how many times, when we are talking about inclusive leadership, we do want to talk about emotions. We do want to talk about feelings. And the pushback I get is, oh no, we don't want to talk about feelings. We have to. And men sometimes have been put into this man box. If you Google it, you'll see a lot of that has been written about the man box. Men were conditioned to not show emotion, to not be vulnerable, to always have the answer. And in the world we're in right now, right? You've probably heard that term VUCA, volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous. No one person at the top can know everything, do everything, be everything. And we've got to open things up so that men can get a break too. And they don't have to fit into this man box and be a certain way. So I love that you brought that up, Chaz. Thank you.
I think we hit a lot of key topics, and we're going to be done here, Cheryl, and I'm going to be like, oh, there'll be these moments where you start connecting the dots the more that you can process it. I want to personally thank you for saying yes to this interview. I've said it on a few other ones, but we weren't sure if people would say yes. And we had a lot of people say yes. And it just goes to show you that it's time. It's time. People are
Yes.
ready. CADIA exists because people are ready. Diversity and equity inclusion officers, directors, the role didn't exist 10 years ago. Not in the way that it exists today. People are ready. The universe, the world is ready. And thank you for doing your part in carving out the little niche and creating a space to move the needle in our industry that we love.
Well, thank you for your work, for bringing the topic front and center, and for inviting people like myself to have this conversation. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for watching. By being open to learning more about these topics, you are fueling a movement that creates a safer and more inclusive environment for women in our industry. And for that, we thank you. It's up to all of us to keep this conversation alive. The only way to rid the industry of the darkness is to shine light on it. The entire 5-part blog series of the dirty little secrets of the automotive and skilled trades industries can be found on ChasidyraySisk.com and Femcanic.com. Until next time, my friends.